The stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Centralia, Washington Territory, and Sarah Owens was the only passenger who didn't move when the driver called out their arrival. Her hands gripped the worn leather bag in her lap so tightly, her knuckles had gone white, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything more than the stale biscuit someone had pressed into her palm 2 days ago. The cholera had taken her parents within a week of each other, and her younger brother had followed them 3 days later. She had no kin left in all the world, and the realization sat in her chest like a stone. "Miss, you getting off here or going on to Portland?" The driver's weathered face appeared in the window, his expression softening when he saw her tear-streaked cheeks. "This is the last stop before we head west." Sarah forced herself to nod and gathered her belongings. She had exactly $12 to her name and nowhere to go, but sitting in this stagecoach wouldn't change that. The afternoon sun hit her face as she stepped down onto the dusty Main Street, and she had to shield her eyes against the glare. Centralia was a lumber town, still rough around the edges in this year of 1878, with the constant sound of saws and hammers echoing from the surrounding forests. Men in work clothes moved purposefully along the wooden sidewalks, and the smell of fresh cut timber mixed with the earthier scent of horses and mud. She stood there for a long moment, uncertain which direction to even walk. The stagecoach pulled away behind her, leaving her completely alone in a town where she knew no one. Her stomach twisted with hunger and fear, but she lifted her chin and started walking toward what looked like a general store. Maybe they needed help. Maybe someone would take pity on a 20-year-old woman with no family and no prospects. The store was busy, and the proprietor barely glanced at her when she asked about work. "Got all the help I need," he said curtly, already turning to his next customer. Sarah felt her eyes burn again but refused to cry in public. She thanked him anyway and stepped back outside. For the next 2 hours, she tried every establishment on the main street. The hotel didn't need maids. The restaurant had just hired someone. The laundry was run by a Chinese family who couldn't afford to pay another worker. By the time the sun started sinking toward the tree-covered hills, Sarah's feet ached, and her hope had nearly disappeared. She found herself walking toward the edge of town without any real destination, just needing to move before the weight of her situation crushed her entirely. That was when she heard the commotion coming from a large paddock near a weathered barn. Several men stood around the fence, watching as someone in the center tried to work with a massive bay horse that clearly wanted nothing to do with human contact. The horse reared and kicked, sending up clouds of dust, and the man dodged with practiced ease. "That bronc's gonna kill someone," one of the observers muttered. "Not if Blake can help it. Man's got a gift with difficult horses." Sarah found herself drawn to the fence, watching as the man in the paddock moved with fluid grace around the agitated animal. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were dusty from work, and there was something in the way he moved that suggested both strength and gentleness. He spoke to the horse in low, calm tones she couldn't quite hear, his hands held out non-threateningly. The horse charged at him, and Sarah gasped, but the man simply stepped aside and let the animal thunder past. He didn't try to grab it or force it. He just waited, patient and steady, while the horse expended its fury and fear. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the bay began to slow. Its sides heaved with exertion, and foam flecked its mouth, but its ears swiveled toward the man more often than they pinned back. "That's it," the man said, his voice carrying across the paddock now. "Nobody's going to hurt you, big fellow. You've had a rough time, haven't you?" Something about his tone made Sarah's throat tighten. There was genuine compassion there, real understanding. The horse took a tentative step toward him, then another. The man didn't move, just kept talking in that same soothing voice. When the bay finally stood close enough to touch, he slowly raised his hand and let it hover near the animal's nose. The horse snorted, considered, then lowered its head and allowed the contact. The men around the fence let out a collective breath, and a few even clapped. The man in the paddock smiled slightly but kept his attention on the horse, stroking its neck and continuing his quiet conversation. Sarah realized she was smiling too, the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks. There was something beautiful about watching someone do what they were clearly born to do. "Blake Winters, best horse trainer in the territory," said an older man standing next to her. "Got a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Takes in the ones nobody else can handle and turns them into fine working horses." He glanced at her curiously. "You new to Centralia, miss?" "I just arrived today," Sarah admitted. The words came out steadier than she felt. "I'm looking for work, actually." The man scratched his bearded chin. "Well, Blake might be able to use some help out at his place. His housekeeper quit last month to go care for her sick daughter, and from what I hear, the place is falling apart. Man can work magic with horses but can't boil water without burning it." Sarah's heart jumped. "Do you think he'd consider hiring me?" "Can't hurt to ask. He's a fair man, treats folks decent. Here he comes now." Blake Winters was leading the bay horse toward the gate, still speaking softly to it. Up close, Sarah could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably around 25, with striking green eyes and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so serious. He looked tired, she realized, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much responsibility alone. "Fine work, Blake," the older man called out. "Got someone here who wants to talk to you about a job." Blake's gaze shifted to Sarah, and she felt herself being assessed with the same careful attention he'd given the horse. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes when he noticed her travel-stained dress and the bag at her feet. "What kind of job are you looking for?" he asked. His voice was deep and rough from disuse, like he spent more time talking to animals than people. Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, manage a household. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly." She hesitated, then added, "I need the work, Mr. Winters. I arrived in town today with nowhere to go." "You got family here?" The question stabbed through her, but she kept her voice level. "No, sir. No family anywhere." Something changed in his expression, a softening around his eyes that suggested he understood loss in a personal way. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "My ranch is 5 miles out of town. It's just me and my foreman out there, plus 4 ranch hands who bunk in the separate cabin. The main house needs work. I won't lie about that. Hasn't had a proper cleaning in weeks, and I've been living on salt pork and burned beans. I can offer you room and board plus $30 a month. The work's hard, the hours are long, and it can get lonely out there." $30 a month was more than she dared hope for. "When can I start?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'm heading back now if you can ride. Otherwise, I can arrange for the wagon to come get you tomorrow." "I can ride," Sarah said immediately, though it had been months since she'd been on a horse. She wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. Blake nodded and handed the bay's lead rope to one of the other men. "Tom, can you make sure he gets settled in the stable with plenty of water? I'll work with him again tomorrow." He turned back to Sarah. "I've got my horse tied at the rail outside the saloon. Wait there and I'll bring around a mare for you." True to his word, he appeared 10 minutes later leading 2 horses, his a rangy buckskin gelding and hers a calm-looking sorrel mare with a kind eye. He helped her secure her bag behind the saddle and then mounted his own horse with an easy swing. Sarah managed to get into the saddle without embarrassing herself, and they started north out of town at a steady walk. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Sarah was too busy taking in the landscape, the way the tall evergreens crowded close to the road and the mountains rose in the distance. The air smelled like rain and green growing things, completely different from the dry prairie where she'd grown up. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both intimidated and excited her. "You come far?" Blake asked eventually, breaking the silence. "Nebraska." "My parents had a homestead near Omaha," she swallowed hard. "They died of cholera 3 weeks ago, my brother too. I sold what little we had and bought a ticket west. Centralia was as far as my money would take me." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss. That's a hell of a thing to go through." "Thank you." She glanced at him. "The man in town said you take in difficult horses. That one today looked like he'd been mistreated. Previous owner tried to break him with a whip and spurs, left him half-starved and mean as a snake." Blake's voice hardened. "Some people think animals are just tools to be used up and thrown away. They're wrong. You were very patient with him. Patience is all you need with most creatures. That and time." He looked over at her. "People aren't much different in my experience. Everyone's got their reasons for being difficult. Usually, it's because someone hurt them first." Sarah thought about that as they rode on. The road wound through the forest, occasionally opening into cleared areas where stumps showed evidence of logging. She saw deer grazing in one meadow, so unafraid they barely looked up as the horses passed. A hawk circled overhead, riding the wind currents with effortless grace. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked. 5 years. Inherited it from my uncle when I was 20. He raised me after my parents died in a fire when I was 8. Blake's expression remained carefully neutral. "He taught me everything about horses and land management. When he passed, he left me the ranch and 12 horses. I've built it up to about 40 head now, plus I take in troubled animals for training." "No other family?" "No, madam. Just the land and the horses and the men who work for me." He paused. "And now you, I suppose." The comment made Sarah's chest tighten in an unexpected way. It felt like the first step toward belonging somewhere again, even if it was just as an employee on a remote ranch. They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Sarah found herself studying Blake when he wasn't looking. There was something about him that drew her attention, a quiet strength combined with that gentleness she'd witnessed with the horse. He sat his saddle like he'd been born there, completely at ease with the rhythm of the horse beneath him. The sun was setting when they finally turned off the main road onto a narrower track that led through a stand of huge cedars. Sarah could smell wood smoke and the sharp scent of pine, and then they emerged into a clearing. The ranch house was a 2-story structure made of rough-hewn logs, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It needed paint, and some of the shutters hung crooked, but the bones of it were solid. Behind it stood a large barn in better condition, and beyond that were several paddocks and the smaller cabin Blake had mentioned for the ranch hands. "It's beautiful," Sarah said honestly, taking in the way the last rays of sunlight gilded everything golden. Blake looked at the house as if seeing it through her eyes. "It's home. Could use a woman's touch, though. My uncle's wife died before I came to live here, and it's been just men ever since." He dismounted and came around to help Sarah down. His hands were strong and calloused as they gripped her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Thank you," she managed, stepping back quickly. Her heart was beating faster than the ride warranted. "Let me show you inside, then I'll tend to the horses." Blake led the way up the porch steps, which creaked alarmingly under their weight. "I'll need to fix those tomorrow," he muttered, making a mental note. The interior of the house was as neglected as he'd warned. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. Dirty dishes were piled in a wash basin, and dust covered every surface. Sarah could see doorways leading to what she assumed were bedrooms, and a narrow staircase climbed to the second floor. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the left. Used to be the guest room. There's a bed and a dresser, and I'll get you some fresh linens from the cupboard." Blake ran a hand through his hair, looking embarrassed. "I know it's a mess. I meant to clean before trying to hire someone, but the days just get away from me." "It's fine," Sarah assured him. "I've dealt with worse. Is there food in the larder?" "Some. Might be enough for a decent meal if you know what you're doing with it." "I'll figure something out. You go take care of the horses, and I'll see what I can do in here." Blake looked relieved and grateful. "Water pump is outside around the side of the house. Firewood is stacked on the back porch. If you need anything, the barn is just across the yard." He hesitated in the doorway. "I'm glad you're here, Miss Owens. I think this is going to work out well." After he left, Sarah stood in the center of the chaotic kitchen and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her family died, she had a purpose again. She had a place to be and work to do. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She tied back her sleeves and got to work. First, she started a fire in the stove and set water to boiling. While it heated, she explored the larder and found potatoes, onions, salt pork, dried beans, flour, and a few precious eggs. There was also coffee, sugar, and some jerky that looked like it had seen better days. Not much to work with, but she'd make it stretch. By the time Blake returned from the barn, darkness had fallen and the kitchen glowed with lamplight. Sarah had scrubbed the dishes, wiped down the table and counters, swept the floor, and had a pot of potato soup simmering on the stove. She'd also made biscuits that were browning nicely in the oven, and coffee perked in a pot on the back burner. Blake stopped in the doorway and stared. "I can smell that from the barn," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "Is that actual food?" Sarah laughed, and it felt good to laugh again. "It's just soup and biscuits, nothing fancy, but it's hot and it should fill you up." "Madam, I've been eating cold beans straight from the can for the last 3 days. This is a feast." He washed his hands in the basin she'd prepared and sat down at the table like a man afraid the meal might disappear if he moved too fast. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you go to Portland or Seattle? Bigger cities would have more opportunities for a woman on her own." Sarah ladled soup into 2 bowls and set one in front of him. "I ran out of money, and honestly, I was running out of courage too. After watching my whole family die, getting on that stagecoach and leaving everything I knew behind, I was barely holding myself together. When the driver said this was the last stop before Portland, something told me to get off here." She sat down across from him with her own bowl. "Maybe I was meant to see that horse today. Maybe I was meant to meet you." Blake studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "I don't know much about fate or destiny, but I do know opportunity when I see it. You needed work, I needed help. That's practical enough for me." "Fair enough." Sarah tasted her soup and found it passable if not exciting. "Tell me about the ranch hands. You said there are 4 of them." "5 with my foreman, Marcus. He's been with me since the beginning, practically runs the place when I'm focused on training. The other 4 are good men, hard workers. They keep to themselves mostly, take their meals in their own cabin. You won't be expected to cook for them, though if you want to send over extra sometimes, they'd appreciate it." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Sarah found herself sneaking glances at Blake, noticing small things like the scar on his left hand, and the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over his bowl. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow, making her blush and focus intently on her biscuit. "These are incredible," Blake said, reaching for his third biscuit. "How did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother taught me. She said a woman who could turn simple ingredients into something satisfying would never go hungry." Sarah's voice caught slightly. "She was right about that, at least." Blake's expression softened. "She must have been a good woman. She was. They both were, my parents. They worked so hard on that homestead, tried to build something for us." Sarah set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. And then it was all gone in a matter of days. The cholera came through like a wildfire. We tried everything we could think of, but there was no stopping it. I had to dig their graves myself because there was no one else to do it. "Miss Owens." Blake's voice was gentle. "Sarah, you don't have to talk about this if it hurts too much." "It does hurt, but holding it all inside hurts worse." She met his eyes across the table. "I'm not looking for pity, Mr. Winters. I just want you to understand why I need this job so badly. It's not just about money. It's about having a reason to get up in the morning again." "I understand that better than you might think." Blake pushed his empty bowl away and leaned back in his chair. "After my uncle died, I spent 6 months barely functioning, just going through the motions, doing the minimum to keep the ranch running. It was Marcus who finally shook some sense into me. He said my uncle wouldn't want me to waste the gift he'd given me by wallowing in grief. Said the best way to honor the dead was to live well. He was right. He usually is, much as I hate to admit it." Blake smiled, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "You'll meet him tomorrow. He'll probably propose marriage within the first 5 minutes of tasting your cooking." Sarah laughed. "I'm not looking for a husband, Mr. Winters, just steady work and a place to belong." "Fair enough." "And you should call me Blake. Mr. Winters makes me feel like my uncle." He stood and started gathering the dishes. "You cooked, I'll clean up. That's only fair. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway." He carried the dishes to the basin. "Why don't you go get settled in your room? I put fresh sheets on the bed while you were cooking. Towels are in the cupboard at the top of the stairs if you want to wash up. We usually rise around 5 o'clock, but tomorrow you can sleep in a bit later since it's your first day." Sarah wanted to argue but found herself too tired to make the effort. The emotional and physical exhaustion of the last few weeks was catching up with her all at once. "Thank you, Blake, for everything, for taking a chance on a stranger." He turned from the dishes, his expression serious again. "You're not a stranger anymore. You're part of this ranch now. That means something." Sarah climbed the stairs with her bag, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. The room Blake had prepared was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade. There was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a dresser with a wavy mirror, and a window that looked out over the dark forest. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into her nightgown, and climbed between the sheets. They smelled like sunshine and cedar, and the mattress was soft enough to be comfortable. Through the floorboards, she could hear Blake moving around downstairs, the clink of dishes being washed and put away. It was a homely sound, comforting in its normalcy. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself relax for the first time in what felt like forever. She had no kin left in all the world, it was true. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find something that could become just as important. A place, a purpose, and a man with kind eyes who understood what it meant to be alone. The next morning, Sarah woke to pale sunlight filtering through her window and the sound of men's voices outside. She dressed quickly in her work dress and apron, pinned up her hair, and headed downstairs. The kitchen was empty but showed evidence of Blake's attempt at making coffee, which sat burned and bitter-smelling on the stove. She dumped it out, started fresh, and began preparing a proper breakfast. She was mixing batter for pancakes when the door opened, and Blake came in with another man. The newcomer was older, probably in his 40s, with graying brown hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. His eyes were sharp and assessing as they landed on Sarah. "Marcus, this is Sarah Owens, our new housekeeper." "Sarah, this is Marcus Sterling, my foreman and the man who actually keeps this place running." Marcus pulled off his hat and nodded respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you, madam. I hear we have you to thank for the amazing smells coming from this kitchen." "Just pancakes and bacon," Sarah said, but she smiled at the compliment. "There's fresh coffee, too. I'm afraid I had to throw out what was in the pot." Blake winced. That bad," she confirmed. "How do you two like your eggs?" "However you're willing to make them," Marcus said fervently. "Madam, if you can really cook, you're going to be the most popular person on this ranch." Breakfast was a lively affair. Marcus was a talker, filling the comfortable silence with stories about the ranch and the horses, asking Sarah questions about where she came from and what brought her west. Blake was quieter, but Sarah noticed he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, a considering expression on his face. "So what's the plan for today?" Marcus asked Blake as they finished eating. "I need to work with that bay again, ease him into accepting a saddle. Then I want to check the north fence line, make sure we haven't had any more breaks. You got to take 4 of the horses down to the timber camp. They're expecting delivery today." Marcus glanced at Sarah. "You need anything from town while I'm out that way?" Sarah thought about it. "If there's money in the household budget, I could make a list of supplies. The larder is pretty bare." Blake pulled out a leather wallet and handed her several bills without counting them. "Get whatever you think we need. Marcus will bring it back this afternoon." Sarah blinked at the amount of money he'd just casually given her. "This is too much. Buy enough to stock us for a month. And get yourself anything you need personally. Consider it an advance on your first month's wages." "Blake, I couldn't." "Yes, you can." His tone was gentle but firm. "You're working for me now, and I take care of what's mine." He seemed to realize how that sounded and quickly amended. "I mean, the people who work for me. I take care of my people." Marcus was grinning into his coffee cup, clearly amused by his boss's flustered explanation. Sarah felt her cheeks warm but nodded and took the money. "I'll make you a list." After the men left to start their work, Sarah spent the morning continuing her assault on the neglected house. She scrubbed floors, beat rugs, washed windows, and organized the chaotic cupboards. The work was hard but satisfying, and with each completed task, the house looked more like a home and less like a bachelor's neglected camp. She made her supply list carefully, balancing practical necessities with items that would let her cook more interesting meals. Sugar, flour, salt, yeast, dried fruit, canned goods, spices, fresh vegetables if any were available, new dish towels because the current ones were beyond saving, soap for laundry and bathing. She hesitated, then added a few personal items she'd been too proud to ask for but desperately needed. Marcus returned in the late afternoon with a wagon full of supplies. Sarah directed him to unload everything in the kitchen, and he whistled when he saw the transformation she'd worked on the room. "Madam, if I didn't know better, I'd think I walked into the wrong house. This place hasn't looked this good since Mrs. Henderson was here, and that was over a year ago." Mrs. Henderson, Blake's uncle's housekeeper. She stayed on for about 6 months after he died, trying to help Blake get his feet under him. But her arthritis got too bad for the work, and she moved to Portland to live with her daughter. Marcus set the last bag of flour on the counter. Blake tried to manage on his own after that, Didn't go so well, as you probably noticed. Why didn't he hire someone sooner?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his expression turning serious. "Between you and me, I think he was so focused on the horses and building up the ranch that he forgot to take care of himself. Blake's got this way of pouring everything he has into helping damaged things heal. But he doesn't leave much energy for his own needs." Sarah thought about that as she put away supplies. It matched what she'd observed about Blake so far, that deep well of patience and compassion combined with a kind of lonely self-sufficiency. "He seems like a good man." "The best I've ever worked for," Marcus agreed. "Fair, honest, works harder than anyone else on the property, but he needs people around him, even if he doesn't realize it. Needs someone to remind him that life isn't just about work and responsibility." He pushed away from the doorframe. "Anyway, I should get cleaned up. The boys and I will be in the bunkhouse if you need anything. And Sarah, I'm real glad Blake found you. I think you're going to be good for this place." That evening, Sarah prepared a proper dinner of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and biscuits. She even made a dried apple pie with the supplies Marcus had brought back. When Blake came in from the barn, his hair damp from washing at the pump, he stopped and stared at the table she'd set. "This is too much," he said, but there was no real protest in his voice. "You don't have to go to all this trouble. It's not trouble, it's my job." Sarah poured coffee for both of them. "Besides, I like cooking. It's something I'm good at, and it feels good to use that skill again." They sat down to eat, and Sarah watched Blake take his first bite of chicken. His eyes closed briefly, and he made a sound of pure pleasure that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "I think I've died and gone to heaven," he said seriously. "Sarah, this is incredible. It's just chicken. It's the best thing I've eaten in 5 years." He met her eyes across the table. "Thank you. For this, for cleaning up the house, for taking something broken and making it whole again." "I could say the same about you," Sarah said quietly. "Yesterday I was standing in the street with nowhere to go and no hope left. You gave me both." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits who understood loss and loneliness. Blake cleared his throat and looked down at his plate. "How was your first day? House didn't overwhelm you. It was good, productive." "I made a lot of progress, though there's still plenty to do." She hesitated. "I saw you working with that bay horse from the window. He looked calmer today. Getting there. He let me put a blanket on his back without trying to kill me, so that's progress." Blake smiled slightly. "Tomorrow I'll try a saddle. Day after that, if he's ready, I'll see if he'll tolerate my weight. Can't rush these things." "You really love what you do, don't you?" "I do. There's something about taking a creature that's been hurt and helping it trust again. Showing it that not all humans are cruel, that there can be kindness in the world." He paused. "I suppose that sounds foolish." "No," Sarah said firmly. "It sounds beautiful and important." They talked through dinner and well into the evening, the conversation flowing easily between them. Blake told her about the different horses he was training, the foal that had been born in the spring, his plans to expand the breeding operation. Sarah talked about her childhood in Nebraska, her mother's garden, her brother's dreams of becoming a teacher. It was the first time she'd been able to speak about her family without breaking down, and she realized it was because Blake listened without pity, with understanding instead. When the clock struck 9, Blake stood reluctantly. "I should let you get some rest." "I'm sure you're exhausted from all the work today." "I am tired," Sarah admitted, "but it's a good tired, the kind that comes from accomplishment instead of grief." Blake paused on his way to the stairs, his hand on the banister. "Sarah, I want you to know something. You said yesterday that you had no kin left in all the world, but you've got family now, right here. Maybe not blood family, but the kind you choose. Me, Marcus, the ranch hands, we take care of our own. You're part of that now." Sarah felt her eyes burn with sudden tears. "Thank you, Blake. You have no idea how much that means to me." "I think I do." His voice was soft in the lamplight. "Sleep well." The days fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. Sarah would rise early and have coffee ready when Blake came in from checking the horses. They'd eat breakfast together, talking about the day's plans, before Blake headed out to work and Sarah tackled her household tasks. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that had gone to weeds. In the afternoons, when her main work was done, she'd often find herself drawn to the paddocks to watch Blake with the horses. It was mesmerizing to see him work. He had an instinctive understanding of equine behavior, reading the subtle signals of ear position and body language that telegraphed fear or aggression or tentative trust. She watched him gentle, a mare that had been beaten, spending hours just sitting in her stall reading aloud until the horse learned to associate human presence with calm instead of pain. She saw him work with a gelding that had never been properly trained, patient and consistent through every frustration and setback. And slowly, almost without noticing when it started, Sarah realized she was falling in love with him. It wasn't a sudden thunderbolt, but a gradual awakening, like watching the sun rise in increments. She loved the way he talked to the horses, his voice low and soothing. She loved his quiet strength and his gentle hands. She loved how he listened when she spoke, really listened, like her words mattered. She loved the rare smiles he gave her, the ones that transformed his serious face into something luminous. She loved his small kindnesses, the way he'd fixed her bedroom door when it stuck, how he brought her wildflowers from the meadow without any explanation. The time he spent an entire evening helping her move furniture, because she thought the parlor would be more welcoming with a different arrangement. She loved his dedication to healing broken things, whether horses or people, but Sarah kept these feelings locked tightly in her heart. Blake was her employer, her benefactor, the man who'd given her a home when she had nothing. She couldn't risk this fragile new life by revealing emotions that might not be welcome or returned. So she channeled her feelings into her work, making his house a true home, filling it with good food and warmth and care. 6 weeks after Sarah's arrival, Blake came in from the barn one evening looking troubled. She'd prepared beef stew and fresh bread, and he sat down at the table without his usual appetite. "Something wrong?" Sarah asked, serving his bowl. "The bay horse." "The one I was working with when you first came to town." Blake rubbed his hand over his face. "His owner came by today, wants to take him back now that he's calm and rideable. Isn't that the goal, to train them and return them?" "Usually, yes. But this man, he's the one who brutalized the horse in the first place. I don't trust him not to undo all the progress we've made, and I can't legally refuse to give the horse back. He owns it." Sarah sat down across from him. "Is there any way you could buy it from him?" I offered. He refused. Says he wants that horse specifically because it's got good bloodlines, perfect for breeding. Won't matter that it's traumatized and afraid. He'll just force it to do what he wants. The pain in Blake's voice made Sarah's heart ache. She reached across the table and took his hand without thinking. "I'm sorry. I know how much work you put into helping that animal." Blake looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw something shift in his expression. But then he pulled away gently and picked up his spoon. "It's part of the business, can't save them all." He took a bite of stew, chewing mechanically. "This is delicious, by the way." They ate in heavy silence. Sarah wanted to say something to comfort him but couldn't find the right words. After dinner, instead of heading upstairs as usual, Blake went out to the barn. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen, then hesitated. She knew he probably wanted to be alone, but something told her that being alone wasn't what he needed. She found him in the bay's stall, sitting in the straw with his back against the wall. The horse stood nearby, calm and trusting now, occasionally lowering its head to nuzzle Blake's shoulder. In the lamplight, with his guard down, Blake looked younger and more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen him. "Mind if I join you?" she asked softly. He looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "It's your funeral if he decides to spook. But no, I don't mind." Sarah entered the stall carefully and settled into the straw beside Blake, leaving a respectful distance between them. The bay watched her with mild curiosity but didn't seem alarmed. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the horses' quiet breathing and the sounds of the barn settling for the night. "His name is Thunder," Blake said eventually. "When he first came here, he'd try to kick down the stall door every night, screaming like he was being murdered. It took 2 weeks before he'd even let me stand in here with him. You've worked miracles with him. Miracles don't mean much if they're undone." Blake's voice was bitter. "Sometimes I wonder why I even try. There are so many damaged horses out there, so many people who see them as things instead of living creatures with feelings and memories." Sarah chose her words carefully. "You try because you're a good man who believes in second chances. Because even if you can't save all of them, the ones you do save matter. That bay horse knows peace now, knows what kindness feels like. Maybe his owner will be different this time. Maybe seeing the change in his horse will change him too. You're an optimist. I'm a realist who's been given a reason to hope again." Sarah turned to look at him directly. "You did that, Blake. You gave me a second chance when I needed it most. That's not nothing. That's everything." Blake met her gaze, and in the dim lamplight, Sarah saw his expression soften. "You've changed things around here too, you know. The house feels like a home now. I actually look forward to coming inside at the end of the day instead of avoiding it, and the men have noticed it too. Marcus said the other day that the whole ranch feels different, warmer somehow." "That's just clean floors and decent food." "No, it's more than that." Blake hesitated, seeming to struggle with something. "It's you, Sarah. Your presence here has made a difference I can't quite explain. I feel less alone than I have in years." Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest. "I feel the same way. You and this ranch, you've given me back my life." They sat there in the quiet barn, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Blake looked like he wanted to say something else, but then the bay horse huffed and shifted his weight, breaking the moment. Blake stood and brushed straw from his pants. "I should let you get inside. It's getting late." Sarah stood too, hiding her disappointment. "Will you be okay?" "Yeah, I'll be fine." He smiled slightly. "Thanks for coming out here. It helped." That night, Sarah lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying the conversation in the barn over and over. The way Blake had looked at her, the tone of his voice when he said she'd made a difference. Was she imagining the possibility of something more between them, or had there been real feeling in his words? She was still awake when she heard the sound of hoofbeats in the yard, urgent and fast. Then Blake's voice calling out to Marcus, the two men's footsteps pounding up to the house. Sarah threw a shawl over her nightgown and hurried downstairs. Blake and Marcus were in the kitchen, pulling on coats and gathering supplies. Blake looked up when Sarah appeared. "Sorry to wake you. One of the mares is in trouble foaling. We need to get out there." "Can I help?" Sarah asked immediately. Blake hesitated. "It's not going to be pretty. Could be a long night. I grew up on a farm. I've helped with difficult births before." She was already moving toward the door. "Just tell me what you need me to do." The mare was indeed in distress when they reached her stall in the barn. She was lying on her side, flanks heaving with effort, but the foal wasn't progressing. Blake knelt beside her immediately, his hands gentle as he examined her. "The foal's positioned wrong. I need to try to shift it." He looked at Sarah. "Can you keep her head steady? Talk to her, keep her calm." Sarah knelt in the straw by the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring soothingly. The horse's eye rolled with pain and fear, but she seemed to take some comfort from Sarah's touch. Marcus held a lantern close while Blake worked, his face tense with concentration. "Easy, girl," Sarah whispered to the mare. "You're doing so well. Blake's going to help you. Everything's going to be all right." It took nearly an hour of careful manipulation before Blake managed to reposition the foal. The mare gave a tremendous push, and suddenly there was a tiny dark shape sliding into Blake's waiting hands. He cleared the membrane from its face quickly, and after a terrifying moment of silence, the foal took its first gasping breath. "It's a colt," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "He's alive." The mare lifted her head, already making soft, nickering sounds at her baby. Blake moved the foal around where she could see and smell him, and the new mother immediately began licking him clean. It was such a tender, primal moment that Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. "You did it," she said to Blake. "You saved them both." Blake looked at her across the straw, and something profound passed between them. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. This time he didn't pull away. His fingers curled around hers, strong and warm, and held on. Marcus cleared his throat delicately. "I'll go make some coffee. You two probably want to keep an eye on them for a while, make sure they're both stable." After the foreman left, Blake and Sarah sat side by side against the stall wall, still holding hands, watching the mare nuzzle her newborn foal. The colt was already trying to stand, all wobbly legs and determination. "Life's stubborn," Blake said quietly. "It fights to survive even when everything's against it." "Is that what you've been doing?" Sarah asked. "Fighting to survive for a long time, yeah. After my parents died, after my uncle passed, I just kept my head down and worked. Didn't let myself feel too much or want too much." He turned to look at her. "And then you showed up and everything changed." Sarah's breath caught. "Blake, I know I'm your employer and this probably isn't appropriate. I know you came here looking for safety and stability, not complications. But Sarah, I need you to know that you've become so much more to me than just my housekeeper. You've brought light back into my life. You've made me remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it." "I feel the same way," Sarah whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but Blake, I can't help it. I've fallen in love with you." Blake's eyes widened. "You have?" "Completely, hopelessly. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you care for broken things. I love how you listen when I talk and how you smile like it's a rare gift you only give to special moments. I love everything about you." Blake raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Sarah Owens, I have been half in love with you since you stood in that paddock on your first day and smiled at me for gentling that bay. I've been trying to fight it, trying to be respectful and professional, but I can't do it anymore. I'm completely, utterly in love with you." And then he was kissing her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Sarah kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she'd been holding inside. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Sarah melted into his embrace. It felt like coming home, like finding the piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is fast. I know we should probably be more sensible about this." "I don't want to be sensible," Sarah said firmly. "I've lost too much to waste time being cautious about happiness. If you love me and I love you, that's all that matters. Then marry me." Blake pulled back to look into her eyes. "I know that's even faster and probably crazy, but I don't care. I want you in my life permanently, not just as my housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner in everything. Will you marry me, Sarah?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Blake kissed her again, and this time there was joy in it, pure, uncomplicated happiness. Behind them, the mare and her foal made contented sounds, and somewhere in the barn a rooster began to crow even though dawn was still an hour away. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Centralia, with Marcus as Blake's best man and the minister's wife standing up for Sarah. The ranch hands all attended, grinning broadly, and afterward there was a celebration at the ranch with food and music and dancing. Sarah wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Blake had bought her in town, and she'd never felt more beautiful than when she saw the way Blake looked at her as she walked down the aisle. "You're stunning," he whispered when she reached his side. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "I'm pretty lucky too," Sarah whispered back, and she meant it with her whole heart. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, both of them nervous but eager to fully belong to each other. Blake was gentle and patient, making sure Sarah felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Sarah felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd been missing, what her heart had been searching for. Not just a home or a purpose, but someone to share it all with. In the months that followed, Sarah bloomed. She expanded the garden, adding flowers alongside the vegetables because beauty mattered too. She learned to ride well enough to sometimes accompany Blake when he checked the far pastures. She became friends with the wives of some of the other ranchers, joining a quilting circle in town. She even helped Blake with the horses sometimes, her gentle presence making some of the more skittish animals easier to work with. Blake was a devoted husband, attentive and affectionate in ways that made Sarah feel treasured. He brought her coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. He built her shelves for her growing collection of books. He insisted on doing the dishes at least twice a week so she could rest. And he told her he loved her every single day, sometimes multiple times, like he was making up for all the years he'd had no one to say those words to. "Are you happy?" he asked her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His arm was around her shoulders, and she was tucked against his side. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sarah answered honestly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. Believe it. Because I'm never letting you go." Blake kissed the top of her head. "You're stuck with me forever, Mrs. Winters." "Good. That's exactly how long I plan to stay." A year into their marriage, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was certain before telling Blake. She chose a morning when he came in from the barn for breakfast, looking tired but content from working with a new group of horses that had arrived the day before. "Blake, I have something to tell you." Sarah set his coffee in front of him and took his hand. "We're going to have a baby." Blake stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, growing until it was the biggest, most joyous smile Sarah had ever seen. "A baby. We're having a baby. In about 6 months, if my calculations are right." Blake stood so fast his chair tipped over backward. He pulled Sarah into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We're having a baby. Sarah, this is incredible. This is the best news I've ever gotten." "I was hoping you'd be happy," Sarah said, laughing too as he set her down and immediately dropped to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," Blake said seriously to her belly. "This is your papa. I can't wait to meet you. You're going to be so loved, little one. So incredibly loved." Sarah ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was everything she'd never dared to dream of after losing her family. A husband who adored her, a home filled with love, and now a baby on the way. She had no kin left in all the world, but Blake had been right that day so many months ago. She had family now right here, and it was more than she'd ever hoped for. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Blake was absurdly protective, trying to prevent Sarah from doing any heavy work, despite her insistence that she was perfectly capable. They compromised by hiring a young woman from town to help with the housework, a few days a week, which also gave Sarah someone to talk to about the mysteries of impending motherhood. In September of 1879, on a warm afternoon with the windows open to catch the breeze, Sarah went into labor. Blake refused to leave her side despite the midwife's assurances that first babies took time. He held Sarah's hand through every contraction, wiped her face with cool cloths, and told her over and over how strong and brave she was. "I love you," he kept saying. "You're doing so well. I'm right here. I love you so much." After 12 hours of labor, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The midwife placed him in Sarah's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red face of her son and felt her whole world shift. This was her child, hers and Blake's, a perfect combination of both of them. "He's beautiful," Blake said hoarsely, tears streaming down his face as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "Sarah, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, unable to look away from her son. Blake thought for a moment. "What about Samuel, after your brother, and James for his middle name after my uncle?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel James Winters. It's perfect." Little Samuel was a good baby, content and healthy. He had Blake's green eyes and Sarah's dark hair, and both his parents were completely besotted with him. Blake would spend hours just holding his son, talking to him about the horses and the ranch, making elaborate promises about all the things they'd do together when Samuel was older. "You're going to spoil him," Sarah said fondly, watching from the doorway as Blake walked the baby around the nursery they'd prepared. "Absolutely I am," Blake agreed without shame. "He's my son. Spoiling him is practically my duty." Marcus was equally charmed by the baby, often stopping by the house to peek at Samuel and tell Sarah what a fine boy she'd produced. The ranch hands all took turns whittling toys for him, resulting in a growing collection of wooden horses, cows, and other animals. Even the most gruff and hardened cowboys would soften when Sarah brought Samuel out to the barn, reaching out gentle fingers to touch his tiny hands. "This baby's going to grow up knowing he's loved by an entire community," Sarah told Blake one night as they watched Samuel sleep in his cradle. "Just like we wanted, just like we deserve," Blake corrected, pulling her close. "All of us." 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose. She was smaller than Samuel had been, with a head full of blonde curls that mystified both parents until Blake's mother's blonde hair was brought up. Elizabeth was more demanding than her brother had been, keeping Sarah and Blake awake for weeks with her fussy crying. But she was also quick to smile and laugh once she settled into life outside the womb. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding. He'd sit next to Sarah while she nursed Elizabeth, patting the baby's head and singing nonsense songs to her. Blake would watch his family with an expression of such profound contentment that Sarah sometimes had to blink back tears of happiness. "What are you thinking?" she asked him one day when she caught that look on his face. "That I'm grateful," Blake said simply. "For you, for our children, for this life we've built. I spent so many years alone, convinced that was my lot in life, and then you appeared and everything changed. You gave me a family, Sarah. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Sarah corrected. I was just as lost as you were, remember? We saved each other. Blake pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb the baby sleeping against her shoulder. Then I guess we're both the luckiest people in the world. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under Blake and Marcus's management, gaining a reputation across the territory for producing well-trained, reliable horses. Blake's patience and skill with difficult animals became legendary, and people would travel for days to bring him their most troubled horses. He succeeded more often than not, though he'd learned to protect his heart from the cases where owners proved less interested in the animal's well-being than in its monetary value. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing signs of Blake's gift with horses. Elizabeth was more interested in helping her mother in the house and garden, though she too loved the animals. When Samuel was 6 and Elizabeth was 4, Sarah gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and Matthew, who were identical in appearance but completely different in temperament. Daniel was calm and thoughtful while Matthew was into everything, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. 4 children, Blake said one evening as they surveyed the chaos of their dinner table, the twins throwing more food than they ate while Samuel tried to explain something elaborate about a horse to Elizabeth, who was ignoring him in favor of her doll. We have 4 children. Are you complaining? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Not even a little bit, though I am wondering how our quiet little ranch turned into a circus. But he was smiling as he said it, his eyes warm with love as he watched their children. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. It's a good circus, though. The best circus in the world, Blake agreed. As the children grew, so did the ranch's reputation and prosperity. Blake and Sarah built a larger house to accommodate their expanding family, keeping the original structure as a guest house and office. They hired more ranch hands to manage the growing herd of horses, and Marcus took on a partner to help with the increased workload. Sarah became known throughout the region for her cooking and her kindness, often hosting dinners for neighbors or taking meals to families who were struggling. Through it all, the love between Sarah and Blake only deepened. They'd weathered the challenges of parenthood, the occasional hard year when money was tight, illnesses and injuries, and all the normal trials of life. But they faced everything together, their partnership rock solid after more than a decade of marriage. You ever think about that day we met? Sarah asked Blake on their 15th wedding anniversary. The children were all asleep, and they were sitting on the porch swing he'd built for her birthday, wrapped in a blanket against the cool evening air. All the time, Blake admitted. I think about how close I came to not being in town that day. If I'd stayed home, if I'd finished with that horse an hour earlier, we might never have met. But we did meet, and you took a chance on a desperate woman with nothing to offer but hard work. Sarah, you've given me everything. You and our children. You're the reason I get up every morning and the reason I'm grateful every night. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Sarah turned in his arms to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her stomach she'd felt on their wedding night. I love you, Blake Winters. I will love you until the day I die and whatever comes after. I love you too. Always and forever. They sat on the swing until the moon rose high above the trees, talking and laughing and occasionally falling into comfortable silence. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, the horses rested. All around them was the land they'd worked so hard to build into something meaningful and lasting. Sarah thought back to that lost, grieving young woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Centralia with no family and no future. She remembered the emptiness, the fear, the bone-deep loneliness of having no one in the world to call her own. And then she thought about Blake's words to her, spoken in what felt like another lifetime. "You've got family now, right here." He'd been right. She'd found family in him, in Marcus and the ranch hands, in the community they'd become part of. And then she and Blake had created their own family, 4 beautiful children who would grow up knowing they were loved and valued and cherished. The grief of losing her first family would always be part of her, a scar she carried in her heart, but it no longer defined her. She'd built a new life on the foundation of that loss, and it was a life filled with more joy than she'd ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "How far we've come. How grateful I am, how much I love our life." Sarah smiled up at him. "And how I wouldn't change a single thing about how we got here." Blake kissed her forehead. "Not even the burned beans and the filthy house, not even those." "They brought us together, didn't they?" "They did indeed." Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the horse training from his father. Elizabeth married a kind young teacher from town and settled nearby, giving Sarah and Blake their first grandchild when Sarah was just 42. The twins went off to university, Daniel studying to be a veterinarian and Matthew pursuing business, both planning to return to the ranch and help modernize its operations. Blake's hair turned silver at the temples, and Sarah found laugh lines deepening around her eyes, but neither of them minded growing older together. If anything, the passage of time made them appreciate each other more. They'd built something lasting, something real, and they could see its fruits in their children's happiness and the ranch's continued success. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Blake took Sarah back to Centralia, to the exact spot where the stagecoach had dropped her off so many years before. The town had grown significantly, with paved streets and electric lights now, but the basic shape of the place remained familiar. "Why did you bring me here?" Sarah asked, though she was smiling. "Because this is where everything started, where I found you or you found me, or maybe we just found each other." Blake took both her hands in his. "I wanted to come back here and remember that lost, scared woman and that lonely, isolated man we used to be, and I wanted to celebrate who we became instead." "We became happy," Sarah said simply. "We became whole. We became a family," Blake agreed. "And Sarah, I want you to know that I would go through every hard thing in my past again if it meant ending up right here with you. The pain, the loss, the loneliness, all of it was worth it because it led me to you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, grateful tears. "I feel the same way. Every single day I thank God that the stagecoach stopped in Centralia instead of going on to Portland. Thank God that I saw you working with that horse and decided to ask about a job. Thank God that you said yes." Blake pulled her into his arms and held her close, right there on the street where they'd first met. And Sarah thought about how she'd been wrong all those years ago when she'd believed she had no kin left in all the world. She'd had family waiting for her, she just hadn't known it yet. Family wasn't just blood and shared history. It was the people who chose to love you, who stood by you through everything, who built a life with you piece by piece, until you couldn't imagine existing without them. She had no kin left in all the world, but she had Blake. And Blake had told her she had family now, right here. And in saying those words and making them true, he'd given her everything she needed to not just survive, but to truly, joyfully live. They went home to their ranch, to their children and grandchildren, to the horses and the land and the life they'd built together. And every day for the rest of their long, happy lives, Sarah woke up grateful for the loss that had led her to love, and for the cowboy who'd seen her loneliness and offered her belonging in its place. They grew old together, surrounded by family, and when they finally passed within months of each other in their 80s, they left behind a legacy of love that would continue through generations. It was exactly the happily ever after that neither of them had dared to dream of, back when they were two lonely souls who found each other in a dusty Washington Territory town. But they'd built it together, one day at a time, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale because it was real and earned and completely, perfectly theirs.